Well, hello, this is James Crable again, and we are entering the 12th week. We're really coming to the end of our course, the 12th week of our course. This week has sort of two exceptions. One of them is that going into this next week will be what we sometimes refer to as Holy Week, which means Good Friday and Sunday, Easter activities. For some of you, that may not mean a whole lot in terms of your schedule. For others, it will mean almost everything because you may have Thursday evening meetings, Friday meetings, worship services, and Sunday, and a lot to plan. So we'll have to be gracious with each other this week and do what we can. There's not a lot of reading. That's the other exception this week. There's not a lot of reading other than finishing Cone, and then there's a one-page document that which is an assessment that I'd like to have you look at. But there is some listening to some interviews. So I'll try to keep this presentation a little bit shorter. I always say that, and then it doesn't end up being that way. But then there's an interview with Nelson Crable, who is a longtime friend, was the former president of Mennonite World Conference, has been a pastor and president of AMBS. And he has written a book called Stuck Together. And I did an interview with him the last time I taught this course online, which was while he was finishing up his book. And so he gives the meat of that book on the topic of this week, which is Polarized America. The second interview was also done in preparation for the last online course. It's with Dwayne Beck, who is a former pastor, Mennonite pastor as well, and has been involved in Better Angels, now called Braver Angels. These two interviews are like 20 minutes long, 30 minutes long, and they will replace some of the reading for this week. So I do hope you listened through them. The interview with Dwayne Beck has some embedded video of examples of what Better Angels does. Just listen through it, and you'll get the gist of it. And then at the other end of that interview with Dwayne, we talk a little bit about what that means and what the implications might be for the church. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. And I'm going to just share my screen now and make a couple comments about the theme of this week, which, excuse me, which is uh, the first week of a 2-week part. I think in your syllabus, this was listed as the second week, um, and the first week was going to be ethnic conflict around the world. The second week was going to be polarized America, but I'm switching those, um, partly because Ruth, our assistant, is going to be joining me for the second one, the ethnic conflict, and tell her story from Ethiopia. So we're doing this one first. We're doing Polarized America first. And then next week, you will have actually be the last basic week of the course. We'll talk about ethnic tensions around the world and the case of Ethiopia in particular, and she'll tell us her story. So this is once again our outline for the course. It's probably memorized by now with this hand-drawn uh, Shema that I've been using, starting with Jesus at the center, adding shalom that intersects with what God is doing in Jesus, then saying, well, so what role does the church play in being a model and messenger of God's shalom, and how it witnesses to the world? All of this at the core can be transported and embraced around the world. But very quickly, the question becomes, but how is it contextualized? And then it starts to feel very different. because every context is different. And so uh, we call all of this God's cosmic project of reconciling all things to himself in the heavens and in the earth below, which is a pretty big agenda. Um, and you are preparing your own contextual analysis. This is just a reminder of some of the features of the final paper. You will reflect on your original essay, if you recall that way back at the beginning, what we called Essay 1. And then you will develop an integrated biblical, theological, missiological reflection on how the four themes that we've been dealing with this whole semester, Jesus, Shalom, Church, and Witness, contribute to God's project. Let me make a comment about that number two. In the syllabus, I talk basically about doing one page on Jesus, one on Shalom, one on Church, one on Witness. That's one way to organize it, where you just work your way through and you do roughly one page per theme. That's one way to do it. What I'm suggesting here is that you could develop an integrated biblical, theological, missiological reflection of those four themes without strictly doing it one page, one page, one page, one page. But the total should be about 4 pages. Whichever way you do it, one page at a time, or integrating it into a 4-page essay where you deal with all four of those themes, that would be fine as well. Whichever style you like the best, but it gives you an outline, a way of thinking about it. Whatever you do, the one page at a time or the 4-page essay or the 4-page section of your final paper, you will insert throughout 8 to 10 quotes and thoughts from the course resources, that is, readings, lectures, or videos. So 8 to 10 means, roughly 2 or 3 per page, where you will cite, you will quote things that people said in interviews, things you read, things you picked up in the videos that illustrate that you're not just writing this off the top of your head, but that you're embedding in the 4-page treatise things you've learned in this course from the various writers and from things people have said. I'll be watching for those. If I see one quote in 4 pages, that won't be good enough. I want to see you demonstrate that you've been paying attention, you've been taking notes, and that you're incorporating the findings into your final paper. And then you will apply these reflections to a specific case study of your choosing. A case study of conflict could be in the family, the church, the nation, or global conflict. And you will ask the question, what difference would God's Shalom project make were it applied to this situation? And if the church was at the center of embodying and proclaiming God's peace in that context. And you have a couple pages to do that. So you'll need to describe the situation, and then you'll need to think back over what you've learned and apply what God's shalom would look like. Don't just describe the situation and then walk away. Describe it well enough so that the reader knows what you're talking about, and then say, and this is what God's shalom could look like. And then by the end, you would write a concluding section highlighting any learnings you have made throughout the course, as well as any lingering questions you have going forward, maybe in a final half or full page. So just to conclude your paper. So there you go. That's sort of what I'm anticipating in the final paper. For the record, this should not be more than 3,000 words or about 10 pages. Giving me 5,000 words doesn't get you extra points. And in fact, you might lose points because I don't want to read more. If you can't say it in 3,000 words, then you need to summarize. So not more than 10 pages. Um, the final due date is Wednesday, April 30. Uh, and and if you get it done before, submit it to me at that address. And if you need library assistance in editing, and some of you do, um, make sure you submit it ahead of time so that you have time to get it back to me by April 30. That means doing it pretty soon. Um, and so that's the final date. If you need, and I don't need to get all the versions from the library, like when they correct and then they send it back to you. Just send me the final version, but get it to the library in time that you can get it to me, the final version, by April 30. If you have any questions, let me know. But that's the plan. So today we're talking about polarization. In America in particular, that is the United States. We have neighbors north and south where we've been creating some pretty bad feelings. That's a whole nother issue. And how they would identify their own polarization within Canada or within Mexico would be a whole nother conversation. I know that situation less. So I'm kind of focusing on the US where many of you live or where you're staying connected. For some of you, this will be a bit of a foreign conversation. You're not in the middle of it. Maybe the next time, next week, when we talk about ethnic conflict, you'll be more versed in the situation and can make a contribution from your situation of living. But it's important for understanding um, the American situation, at least, to know that we have multiple levels of this polarization. You've been reading James Cone. You'll finish that this week. So there are the racial points of tension. We have class struggles between the working class and the educated and the elite and the rich. Especially right now, we're experiencing the rich getting much, much, much richer. Even over this tariff war thing that's happening, the rich are doing quite well, thank you. And sometimes because they know what's coming and they invest at the right times, which is called insider trading. But it's not very well controlled right now. So that's a whole issue. There's the Israel, Palestine, Gaza politicized theology that we're facing. There are in this country blue and red, Republican and Democrat. I got I got those reversed. It should be in our context, it's red and blue, Republican and Democrat differences. And we're divided pretty much down the country. Our current president won. He likes to claim a big victory. It was actually very close. We're divided almost half and half. And so, this ripples out into our families, into our churches. We have sexuality conversations going on. There are interfaith conflicts in the United States and as we relate to the rest of the world. And then we have these social media bubbles where we live in our little worlds. We can't say a lot about all of these, but it's just to identify that it's very complex. The Elkhart Truth, which is our local newspaper, 2 years ago had this diagram, which basically has symbols of different world religions, and just a visual opinion by the author here, Mike Lukovich, where he says, desperate times require that we stick together. So we face world religious differences beyond our Christian faith. I had a professor several years ago who was fairly well known, Yves Congar, who was a French Dominican Catholic, one of the architects of Vatican II in the 1960s. In 1977, I took a course with him in Paris, and he made an interesting comment about how we work at interchurch. Be careful how we use words. There is interchurch and interfaith. And I'll say a word about that in a little bit. But sometimes interchurch, the word interfaith is used to describe conversations between Mennonites, Presbyterians, and Baptists. Technically, those are not interfaith conversations, they're interchurch, they're among Christians. And our course that I took with him was between different Christian groups. There were Anglicans and Orthodox, and he was Catholic. And we were, in his words, my little Mennonites, my wife and I. But here's what he said. He said, if you want to develop relationships, there are 5 levels of relationships. And you might find this helpful in all kinds of ways, just to be thinking about it. The first level is personal relationships, friendships, hospitality, one-to-one relationships, meal sharing, informal, small gatherings, fostering fun and camaraderie, etc. The second one is doing stuff together, projects, group activities, fundraisers, work teams, mobilizing for common causes like eradicating poverty, homelessness, or infectious diseases. So the first is sharing meals together and very informal. The second is doing things together. And, most Mennonites can do that with Presbyterians and Baptists and Catholics and so on. Then there's piety. Actually, he gave these in French, but they work in English, all 5 P's. Piety he used to refer to spiritual disciplines, rites and rituals, formalized liturgical recitations or musical compositions, silent or directed retreats, where the spirituality of our different traditions are placed alongside each other and we attempt to listen to each other and learn from each other. Then the next phase there is prayer or corporate worship, common liturgy, exhortation, singing, preaching, reading scriptures of sacred books. So the Bible and the Quran and various other sacred books from different traditions are read and meditated on by people of different faiths. Well, no, actually, sorry, this is within the church. This is interchurch. So you might have Presbyterians and Mennonites, low church and high church people worshiping together. And even there, that can be difficult because there are very different styles between Pentecostals and high church liturgy. But this is one level of engagement with someone of another Christian tradition. And the last is propositions, conversations about doctrine, confessions of faith, belief systems, theological systems, and creeds. What do Lutherans believe? What do Presbyterians believe? What do Anabaptists believe? And Mennonite World Conference and other groups have been trying to have conversations with other Christian traditions to see what we have in common and where the differences lie. Now, this is interchurch relations. That's what Yves Congar's lecture was about. But if you move it now to interfaith relationships, now we're talking about Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus. Do these still apply? And I've just basically reproduced the same 5 categories, but asking, so what does it look like between people of other faiths? And here were Yves Congar's suggestions or comments. Number 1, these are on a scale of difficulty. The easiest is sharing a meal together. The hardest is propositions, trying to see where the differences are in our belief systems, our confessions of faith, and theological statements and creeds. So this is a kind of ladder of difficulty from the easiest to the most difficult. So that's the first point. They're not of equal difficulty. The second thing is just because these are of different levels of difficulty doesn't mean that we should just start with the most difficult and abandon the most simple. there's no reason why we can't work at multiple levels while we're working toward the more complicated conversations. So all of them are important, but they are of different complexity. So while you may be discussing the Trinity with Muslim brothers or sisters, it doesn't mean you can't share a meal and get to know each other and hear other people's stories. Generally, that affects the way we think about the rest of the things by starting with the more simple and moving toward the more complicated. So this topic this week is Polarized America. What differences do we have between church traditions, faith traditions? Is this kind of a diagram helpful in helping you think through how you might relate to your neighbor? I'm giving this second diagram just to remind us of all the sources of information that are blasting at us uh, in 60 seconds. Now, this is already 10 years old. When you look at this and you see the categories of email, Facebook, Google, Instagram, Skype, Zoom isn't even on there, Twitter, WordPress, WhatsApp, and YouTube. There are whole channels of communication that aren't even listed there from 10 years ago. But these are all the ways in which in 60 seconds we are receiving information. So that means that this is so complicated because we are not all receiving the same information from the same sources. And so we develop our thought patterns based on what we're hearing and listening to. I would also just point out that all of these that you see on this screen um, basically did not exist uh, when I was growing up and even into the 70s and the 80s, which means that all of these are in the course not of my lifetime, but of my children's lifetime. My children are now about 40, a little bit more or less. This is all in their lifetime. And since in some of these are in my grandchildren's lifetime. So this is the complexity of the world in which we live. John Paul Lederach provided this visual image, which highlights what he calls red and blue Democrat and Republican communication. His commentary on this image reports this. He says, I recently saw a visualization of large data that tracked digital communication between liberal and conservative blogs. It looks like a colorful amoeba splitting. A large chunk of blue was splitting from an equally large chunk of red. The very small portion of yellow, if you see that in the middle, appeared to be the stressed connective tissue that had not yet lost contact with either color. So that's the only place where there's some conversation going on between the bubbles. And then he says this, the colors represented an exploration of communication in blogs around the presidential election of 2004. That's how old this was already. Lada Adamic and Natalie Glantz, who tracked and visualized this data, observed that 91% of the communications stayed in the community where it originated. Basically, people talking with people who say and then hear and say the same thing. That was 15 years back. Everyone just stayed in their preferred hearsay. This week, did 91% of our communication stay only in the hometown of like-minded folk where it originated? I confess too much of mine did. So this is an interesting reminder, and this is part of the challenge that we face. Um, what amazes me is how old this appears already and how it's probably even more accentuated now with multiple sources and media used in communication. The bubbles have not become more overlapping, but maybe less. And so we live in these challenging times. So these are some of the types of polarization. We've looked a little bit at the interfaith or interchurch conflicts, some of the social media bubbles. This is a diagram that I put together some years ago, which basically has two polarized extremes of us and them, where there's no encounter on either side. It's a little bit like the bubbles we just saw of red and blue, but potentially in between, um, if we want to move from us to them, there are some conflicting detours. So above the arrow, the line that's going from left to right, above that line, that arrow, is a category I'm calling we and they are different. So one form of saying that is paternalism, which is basically we are better than them. Romanticism, which is they are better than us. And separatism, we can't figure out how to exist together, so we will separate and live in separate communities. There's no dialogue happening anymore. This has been shaped politically by things like apartheid, where basically you wall off communities and live separately. Below that line is a kind of simplistic statement, not that we and they are different, but we and they are the same. So there's a kind of provincialism on one hand, which doesn't recognize the complexities of our world, um, and just says things like, well, we all eat food, we all go to the bathroom, we all have sexual relationships, we all do this, we all do that. So basically, we're all the same. Or reductionism, which says everyone is basically like me. uh, Advertisers sometimes build on this kind of an idea. Several years ago, there was a Coca-Cola commercial, visual commercial, showing Buddhist monks and Hindu religious characters and people in the United States, rural farmers, all drinking Coca-Cola, and basically saying the world would just be better if we'd all just drink the same drink. That's a kind of reductionism that basically has as a foundation, we're all the same. And there are different ways that these things act out. If we are better than others, we can crush them. If we're separate, we just coexist, but don't really dialogue or live in community. We can coerce our view onto other people. We can clone people into us because we're sure we're better and they should be like us. And then I have six C's, which represent what I call true encounter rather than close encounter. So one of these is committing to something deeper than just having a close encounter, connecting intentionally with the other, confessing when we have misunderstood the other or mistreated them, conversing. I like this word rather than debating or even dialoguing, because you win a debate, you don't generally win a conversation. But you can have a conversation. And then if we have beliefs or commitments or practices that we think are worth others considering, we commend them. We don't force people, we don't impose them, but we can commend what our experience has been And it's up to other people with free will and choice to decide if they think they're willing to think about that or consider it. And if they do or don't, we work at creating something new that we haven't experienced up until now. So this is just a way of thinking of conflict in our communities, um, and all the different versions of it, so many versions of polarization. Um, I'd like to just remind us of two helpful resources. There is the Better or Now Braver Angels depolarizing worksheet, and also the 5 skills checklist. And these are made available on the Moodle website, or in our in this presentation, that you might want to consider as ways of thinking about, reflecting on, or using in groups, your to help people move from one attitude to another. The Better Angels depolarizing um, uh, assessment asks questions like, how often do I find myself thinking about those people on the other political side without much regard for the variation among them? They're all grouped together. How often, number two, do I find myself assigning mainly self-serving or negative motives to the other group and mainly positive motives to my group? Number three, how often do I find myself focusing on the most extreme or outrageous ideas and people on the other side, thereby making it hard to see how a reasonable person could remain in that group? Number four, how often do I find myself comparing the worst people on the other side with the best people on my side? And number five, how often do I feel a rush of pleasure with friends when we ridicule those crazies on the other political side? And lastly, which of the following is closest to my overall or most common emotional attitude towards the majority of people who support the other side? Circle the one closest to where you are now and underline the one you aspire to be too, if they are different. Would you say that your attitudes are characterized by hate, disdain, pity, basic respect, and appreciation? This is an interesting tool for yourself or for a group to just think about those who are different, might have alternative views to your own. And if you want to use this, you can. Um, this is available here or on the Better Angels website. The new publication that Nelson Crable has come up with is called Stuck Together. He's going to talk about some of his ideas in an interview that you'll be listening to. The subtopic here is the hope of Christian witness in a polarized world. So if you want to know more about his theological reflections, biblical reflections, you can get a copy of this book and pursue it. I'd like to just end this session with a piece of music by a group called Common Hymnal. Um, and it talks about keeping focused on that first circle that we identified as Jesus, the means through which God wants to reconcile all things to himself. As we go into Holy Week, to Good Friday and the resurrection, I leave this song with you and wish you all the best as you work on these issues.
Great ideas can come from anywhere. With Wix, you decide.
Come on now. Come One now. All right. Come on, let's do that. Y'all can do that too. Ooh, yeah. Yeah. When they saw Jesus, they saw a teenage mother. They saw an unbelieving brother, just a man in poverty. But when I see Jesus, I see the sovereign and the Savior. I see the healer of the nations. I see the stone rolled away. And nobody thought that this son of sorrow would be broken for love to fix our tomorrows. But it's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. Now let everybody know that it's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. Now let everybody know it's the cross that made the change. And when they saw Jesus, they saw a rebel and a problem. And they did everything to stop him. Yes, they did. Even put him on a tree. Yeah. But when I see Jesus, I see the sovereign and the Savior. I see the healer of the nations. I see the glory from Galilee. And nobody thought that this son of sorrows, hey, would be broken for love to fix our tomorrow. And when this room is the cross that made the change, it's the cross that made the change. Do you believe it? I'll let everybody know that it's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. And I'll let everybody know that it's the cross that made the change. Now when we see Jesus, we become like Jesus. Y'all know this, come on. Where we know how he sees us, we will never be the same. Come on, sing it with me. Now when we see Jesus, alright, we become like Jesus. When we know how he sees us, we will never be the same. Sing it one more time. Now when we see Jesus, oh yeah, 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 we become like Jesus. When we know how he sees us, we will never be the same. And nobody thought that this son of sorrow would be broken for love to fix our tomorrows. And nobody thought that this son of sorrow would be broken for love to fix our tomorrows. But it's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. I'll let everybody know that it's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. It's the cross that made the change. And I'll let everybody know that it's the cross that made the change. Said the cross. The cross that made yes, it did. The change. Jesus did it for me. The cross that made the change. Every nation of the world is touched by the cross. The cross that made shed the change. And you, the cross that made the change. Come on, say the cross that made the change. Yeah. The cross that made the change. There's love in the cross that yes, there is change. Oh, that made the
Well, I'm anxious to hear what you think as you head into Holy Week. Please do the sharing that you're going to do in the places where you need to do it. And we'll be all listening to hear what the different reactions are. Blessings to you.